What a great book this is. I know this is going to sound stupid, but it reminded me of a blow-by-blow description of the two fights between Rocky and Apollo Creed. This book is that exciting. So it's the second volume in Gordon Ray's series on the Overland campaign. A few weeks ago, I reviewed Ray's first volume on the Battle of the Wilderness. And all of the comments of a general nature that I made about that book apply to this one. The maps are excellent. All the major phases of the battle are outlined down to brigade level and sometimes to regimental level. The experiences of individual soldiers on each side are described in their own words, and those descriptions are sprinkled throughout the narrative. Just as in his first book, Gordon Ray pays particular attention to the conduct of the generals on each side. He furnishes enough detail to understand why they did what they did. Finally, the writing is great. It's exciting, suspenseful, and very fast-moving. Now, what about the battle itself? We know how it came out. It was basically a draw with heavy casualties on both sides. But let's talk about those losses. Looking at the Union first, when you combine the casualty figures in this battle with those in the Wilderness, you see that Grant lost a total of 33,000 men in just 8 days. 8 days! That equates to a 28% reduction in the strength of his army. On the other hand, Lee lost 26,000 men in the same 8 days, or about a third of his effective fighting force. The important thing about those losses was that Lee would be unable to mount any offensive operations against Grant, since Grant now outnumbered Lee 3-1, and Lee had no hope of reinforcements. Now let's take a look at each of these two commanders within the context of this battle. First, Lee. He started out with a great advantage. The men in his army were used to moving very, very quickly, and they were very highly motivated. Even though in the Wilderness he had lost his best corps commander, James Longstreet, the corps commanders he took into this battle turned out to be quite effective: Anderson, Early, and Ewell. He had the advantage of fighting this battle on interior lines, so he was able to quickly move units to the spots that Grant was targeting. He also retained a significant and an effective cavalry force, which Grant, for his part, didn't have. As to Grant, his principal advantage was numbers. He had more infantrymen and more artillery than Lee. But that would be an advantage if, but only if, he could move it all as quickly as he wanted and needed. But his army couldn't move anywhere near as fast as Grant wanted. Grant had the disadvantage of a goofy command structure. 3 of his corps reported to George Meade, which meant that Meade acted as a kind of a filter between him and 3 of his main battle formations. The 4th formation, Burnside's 9th Corps, bypassed Meade and reported directly to him. A further problem was that after the fight in the Wilderness, his army was exhausted. Of course, the Confederates were just as tired, but at this point, the Army of the Potomac seemed to have a harder time shaking that off. Grant made some serious mistakes. The big one, I think, was letting Sheridan take the entire cavalry force off on a ride to Richmond. He managed to kill Jeb Stuart, but he also deprived Grant of the ability to get a clear picture of Lee's troop dispositions. And this problem was compounded by the fact that Grant and Meade stayed at their headquarters, which were somewhat removed from the battlefront. Contrast that with Lee. He retained a substantial cavalry unit, and he also seems to have been everywhere on the battlefield, seeing with his own eyes exactly what was going on. I think the only mistake that Lee made was pulling the artillery that was covering the troops in the salient, the Bloody Angle. Now, in this book, Gordon Ray also faults him for ordering Anderson to move up to the courthouse too late to be effective. But the fact is that Anderson ignored him, and consequently, I don't think that mistake had any effect whatsoever on the battle. Now, I've always been a big Grant fan, but this battle exposed some serious weaknesses. The main one was his ordering assaults too quickly, with too little planning and too little coordination. Another thing, I think, was his tendency to tiptoe around chain of command issues for political reasons. Of course, he's going to learn from all this and clean up his act big time. He was lucky Lincoln gave him the time to do it. Of course, the price his army paid was huge. Well, that's my take. What's my bottom line on this book? It's terrific. Maybe it's not for the guy who has only a passing interest in the Civil War. But for the rest of us Civil War and military history junkies, it's absolutely great. Now that I've finished with Spotsylvania Courthouse, I'm going to read Gordon Ray's next volume on the move to the North Anna River. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, press the like button, press the subscribe button, and once again, thank you for your viewership.